I was never a marketer because I was an engineer. So I was scared of becoming a marketer. I was scared of doing something that is impossible to measure. I just scared to try something. Gated content is dead. Who would put their email to pay for gated content? I don't think it makes sense anymore. Outbound is slowly dying. Like we're even seeing it with our customers that even with these hyper-personalized emails, we see less and less conversion in all of them. I think eventually it will die once we have an AI that can actually look into our inbox and tell us what to read, which Gmail just launched last week.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Evergrow Show, and today I have with me Martin Gontovnikas. Martin is the growth architect behind some of the most effective developer marketing engines in history. Early in his career, Martin joined a small startup called Auth0 as employee number 6 and helped propel it from zero revenue to a $6.5 billion acquisition by Okta. Martin is now the co-founder of Hypergrowth Partners, where he acts as a fractional C-level operator for the next generation of unicorns like Vercel, Ramp, and Retool. If you're a technical founder or a marketer trying to survive this AI shift, this conversation is going to be a masterclass. Gonto, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting. Excited to chat.
Super excited to dive in. Well, why don't we kick it off with, you've famously said that code doesn't win and distribution wins. But most builders and technical founders are fairly skeptical about marketing, and they often call it the dark side. Can you remember the specific moment where you came to this realization, and what was one of the first things that you tried in this new mindset?
Makes sense. What I talk about first is like, I do believe product matters. Like if you have a shitty product or shitty code, you will never win. But what I don't believe in is this idea of if you have a great product, people will come and they will magically come. And I think that's where distribution matters so much. So if you first need to make sure the product works really well. But then I've seen so many people who who did a really good product, but then they didn't know who was their specific target market. They didn't know who they should talk to. They didn't know how and where those people live. So that's, to me, what's distribution. When I think about distribution, it's tapping into people's existing habits. So I don't think marketing is like, oh, you do what you have done in your previous job. It's not like, oh, we're going to do ads and they work. It's you understand who you are going after. You talk to a lot of them. You understand what they do on their day-to-day, and you just show up there multiple times and show up there enough times where they're like, okay, what the fuck is this product? I'll give it a try. I'll see what it is because it has shown up a lot of times. And that's where what matters so much, because if you don't show up on their day-to-day and they don't even know that you exist, why would they even use you? How? The first time that this showed up was when I was doing open source. Like I was a developer and I started to do open source. And my first 3 projects, nobody used them. And I was like, I think they are good, but maybe they suck. And eventually I realized, again, remember this was like 12 years ago, that maybe I had to do work to make the open source projects popular. So I started to go speak at conferences about this. I started to build relationship with other open source maintainers. I started to answer questions in Stack Overflow. I started to do blog posts. I started to tweet at people about it. And once I started doing that, the project started to become a lot more popular. And I ended up starting to do workshops for that project in different companies. And I realized that for me, it was more fun making it popular rather than building it myself. And that's when I moved more to the marketing side instead of just coding.
And I totally agree with you. It's so funny. We have this whole generation of folks who are now just so dead focused on vibe coding. They're building. And then they're kind of launching into the ether, and they're watching their user counts, they're watching their revenue counts, and they're wondering, why is nobody showing up and why is nobody using my product? And I think there's 2 things, working in parallel. One is that if you build it, they won't come. People need to hear about it. People need to understand why this is useful. How is this going to get me from where I am now to where I want to be? I think the other thing that's happening right now is there is so much noise being created, and there's so many tools, products, apps launching every single day that I feel like it is working against folks at this point to not know marketing, to not know distribution. And so I think that was a really good point, is that you need to show up in front of the right people who you are targeting. And I think, to rewind, you need to build a good product. You cannot market a shitty product. That is just not the way it's going to work. So you need to show up in front of the right people. You need to explain exactly why this product is going to provide value to them. And then you need to be able to guide them down the funnel, as we like to call it in marketing, or through the loops that actually power the growth of companies.
Adding to that, it's not just tapping into their habits, but it's also they need to pay attention. And there's so many things now that catch our attention. Like people are addicted to TikTok, to Instagram Reels, to YouTube Shorts, where you have to be different. Like I have this mantra that it's better to be different than better. If you do the same as the rest, but slightly better, nobody would notice. If you do something scrappy and weird, but it's unique and nobody has ever seen it, people will pay more attention. And that, in a world where attention is all you need, where attention is so scarce and so hard to get, that's what matters the most as part of your distribution strategy as well.
And I love that before we started the recording, you asked me, what's this green background around the video? And so that's, it's little things like that. It's like, how do you catch the attention? How do you stop the scroll? How do you differentiate just a little bit in every single thing that you do? And those little differentiations, they definitely compound and create meaningful differences between, in the signal to noise ratio.
Exactly.
So you've championed the title of Chief Technical Marketing Officer, right? In a world full of product-led growth, do you believe that the traditional non-technical CMO is becoming obsolete to some extent?
I think in parts, like there's two parts of it. Like one, I think you have to become more and more technical, or at least learn to use AI now to be able to do more things with less. I work with a lot of companies, and in all of them, they're trying to hire less marketers so that they can do more with less. I think becoming more technical and being able to do things by your own makes a lot more sense. And to give you an example, Brain Trust, one of the companies that I work with, they decided not to use a CMS because I personally don't believe in CMS, because they give you this dream that you're going to be able to update your landing page and the copy. But then when a new feature comes, when something happens, you also want to change the design, you want to do more things. So in their case, they end up by coding. They don't know how to code, but they know how to use Cloud Code or how to use Personally to do some of the changes. And they end up by coding the changes to the website so that they ship it. Or they end up doing automated marketing campaigns where they start scrapping different pages to get some data and then use that data to do outbound. So I think on one side, you have to become more technical, and I think that applies to all marketing teams. On the other side, I think for product-led growth specifically, the marketing side has to be more close to product than to sales. Typically, marketing is very close to sales because what it happens in an old school company or a top-down company is marketing needs to create campaigns that then will be executed with sales, so they go sell to other people without even trying the product. I think a fantastic example of this is Marketo. You cannot try Marketo, because if you were able to try Marketo, which is a marketing automation platform, nobody would use it because it fucking sucks. And that's why they have a really good team of sellers who can sell it. But in a product-led growth world where you can just sign up to something and try it out, it matters more the connection between the product team and the marketing promise that you give, because in some of that sense, once people come and try it out, if they like it, they'll pay. You don't need sales. So that connection between product and marketing is so much more important. And I'm starting to see more companies where the product and marketing leader is the same. Great example of this is ClickHouse. ClickHouse is a database, like a real-time database. Tanya, for example, there leads both product and marketing. And I'm starting to see more and more, and I find it's extremely interesting.
I would love to zoom in on something you said. Do you feel like the future of products is going to be basically those that are gated behind enterprise contact forms and sales teams? Do you feel like those are going to start getting deprecated because it's so much easier to build and so much quicker to, put a great product out there? Are those companies that are gating shitty products behind contact forms going to start slowly but surely going away?
I think so. I think it will take some time because it still happens that in a big corporation, people do not want to be fired. It's this phrase, nobody got fired for buying IBM. And if you think about it, for those people, because they don't want to lose their job, they'd rather pick something that Gartner says is good rather than something that they try or give something a chance. Those people will slowly change, but sometimes those people are older or different generation or something. So I think it will take some time, probably 10, 15 years. But I think eventually a lot of these products that are always behind the gate will start dying. Great example of this is gated content. I haven't seen a piece of gated content in the last 3 years, probably. Gated content is dead. Who would put their email to pay for gated content? I don't think it makes sense anymore. And I think the same will apply for products. And I think people are realizing that we used Marketo, for example, at Auth0. I hated it because I couldn't do things. And we had to hire Marketo specialists, which means people don't know how to use it. And they had to learn how to use it so they could use it. Like, it makes absolutely no sense. Like, I hope they go out of business, sadly. Sorry for the people who work there, but a lot of these products are just so bad.
Yeah, I mean, obviously no hard feelings, but I think these days, if you have a shitty product, you have no room in the industry at this point. And I love actually the example that you gave with Marketo, and I can think of a few other companies, I'm not going to name names, but a few other companies where you actually need to hire specialists in order to implement these products in your business. And hey, 5 years ago, that was just the reality we were living in. There was no other alternatives, there was no other options. In today's day and age, and I've heard a lot about in the future, we will spin up interfaces when we need them, we will deprecate them, and the next time we need them, we will just spin it up again. And I feel like it's slowly leading to this death of, these complex, archaic systems that are just not a pleasure to use, that slow everybody down and create these ecosystems where, it's very exclusive, it's not inclusive, it's very, specific to the point where, like you said, you need to hire somebody to actually implement this thing for your company. That's crazy.
And for some things, I think companies will end up building something custom for themselves. Lee Robb, who was the head of developer relations at Percel and now is the head of developer relations at Cursor, wrote an article on how they moved from Sanity CMS to no CMS, where they vibe coded sort of a CMS that now they've taught the marketers how to write content for the website and for the blog, and it works for them. And I'm not saying that will be true for everything, but I do think we'll see more and more custom built things that work really well for your use case. Because a lot of these products have to make a lot of generic decisions, so they work for everybody. And eventually they add so many features, so it applies to everybody. So their target market increases, and then the product becomes bloated. Jira from Atlassian, I think, is a great example of this. And Linear has killed them because of their opinionated approach, where maybe Linear, it's a ticketing management system. It's not for everybody, but it's really good because they have opinions, they have thoughts. And if you like it, great. If not, that's fine. But I think we'll see also more and more products that are either extremely opinionated or, in some cases, custom built for specific companies.
Totally agreed. And, with all the companies that I've ever worked with, ever worked for, one of the, big beliefs that I held true was walking in and saying, don't try to build something that's not your core competency. Focus on the thing that you do. Do not waste the time, the money, the resources, the energy to try to build something. Like, again, not to name any names, but, if you're a company that is building a SaaS tool and you build your own email tool, like, this is not this is not going to end well. And I've seen this happen over and over again. But it's funny because these days I almost have the opposite belief. It's, look at what's out in the market, look at the solutions. If they don't work perfectly for, the way your company operates or for your budget, might actually not be the craziest thing in the world to go ahead and try to build a custom solution for yourself.
Some of those custom solutions don't even require code. I met today with the head of product marketing at Braintrust, and they built something to help the sales team with competitive analysis. What they built is they built a Notion agent that will read into all of the Notion docs they have. It will read all of the Slack conversations. It will read the websites from the competition, the road, the change log, etc., and roadmap. And it will also read other things that are online, and it will daily update the competitive information that's in there for sales based on everything that's going on. To do it, she just had to configure a Notion agent and work on it and do it, which took maybe 2 hours. But now they have a competitive intelligence that self-updates daily and that sales can see it live every time. There were a lot of products that did this. And she was saying me with existing tools and just some connectors and MCP to do it so fast. And those are the type of things that I expect marketers to do now in any team.
Absolutely. I mean, going back to what you said, I think gone are the days where marketers say, hey, we need developer resources, or we can't do this because it's going to take a long time to build. I mean, pretty much anything is infinitely accessible at this point. And at this point, if you're in marketing and you aren't able to connect an MCP server or automate a process or even use something like Zapier to connect to endpoints and have information pass between tools, I mean, you're unfortunately probably going to be phased out. I actually want to double click on something that you said. So, AI for, let's just say, automated outbound. This is something that, is somewhat of a controversial topic, but to some extent, I feel like this is kind of the direction that it's heading in the future. And you, at Hypergrowth, you've advised companies like Ramp to use AI for effective craziness in outbound. Can you share some of the specific examples of AI-driven growth experiments or outbound engines that are producing really good results right now?
Sure. When we started doing automated outbound, there was no tool that did automated outbound. Now, there are some tools that help you do it, like Common Room and Unify, which I think are really good for the common scenarios. But something we've seen lately is that those general scenarios are not working as well anymore because everybody is doing them. So once everybody's doing it, it sort of stops working, which is why a lot of these automated outbounds have to be custom to work. I'll give you 2 examples of things we did. Ramp, it's a B2B credit card. One thing that we did with them, for example, was number one was look at what services a company uses. Let's say a company uses Marketo and Salesforce. Then we looked into how many employees they had in each team that could potentially use these tools. So, for example, they have 16 people in marketing and 20 people in sales. We knew approximately what's the ASP for these services for each person. So then we send custom emails to CFOs saying like, hey, we know you're using these 4 platforms. You have this number of users in each platform. So that means that likely you're paying 1.2 million in these platforms. If you were to pay with Ramp, you will get 1.5% cashback on all of those, and the service would be free. Why are you using something else? And all of those were like, oh, they actually understand. They can give me like a good number. I should look at it and do it. Another example was with Vercel, for example. Vercel sells website deployments, and there is something that's called Page Speed Insights. It's a service that will give you how performant your website is. So what we did was we went and looked into companies and their competition. And we did a page speed insight by API for both the company and their competitor. And if their competitor had a better score, we would email them like, hey, your website loads this much slower because of this, and this problem. If you were to host this on Vercel, all of these problems would be solved. It would be much faster, and you would increase your conversion rate in this number just based on the speed. Why don't you give it a try? So those two examples, we've done a lot more, but all of them, what they have in common is it's something where you're giving them information that they didn't have. It's extremely personalized, and they are getting some value by just reading that specific email. And I think those are the only type of outbound emails that work now, mostly because outbound is slowly dying. Like we're even seeing it with our customers, that even with these hyper-personalized emails, we see less and less and less conversion in all of them. I think eventually it will die once we have an AI that can actually look into our inbox and tell us what to read, which Gmail just launched last week. But as these things start happening, they will start working less, I think. But for now, at least they still work.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, by the way. You recently published something about the death of the browser, and it's something that I think about a lot too, in some of the conversations that I've been having with really smart marketing leaders. You know, everybody's thinking about what does a world look like where people don't really visit my website, or where people don't necessarily have to, go out and manually do research. And so you mentioned kind of one symptom or one effect of that is that outbound is dying, for example. What does that world look like to you, at least in the next 1 to 3 years? And if people want to future proof their businesses or try to figure out what are some of those big bets that they want to take right now, what would you recommend to founders thinking about a world in which browsers are dead?
I think as we start using less browsers and more ChatGPT or Claude for decisions, we have to think a lot more into how those things are looking and exploring into platforms. All of my buying decisions lately have been done with ChatGPT for at least for anything in my house. And I think for options that I will pick. So if we think that in the future, everything will be done through that, I think number one is we need to think about how to optimize them. And those things keep on changing. But now, for example, some things that work is writing content specifically for AIs. Like I've worked on building hidden blogs with my customers, where some of these hidden blogs are AI slop, to be honest. But that content helps to position you in a better place. Other things are Reddit. Like Reddit are like real humans' opinions. So ChatGPT puts a lot of thought into what Reddit says, or Medium. So we've done a lot of work on talking to friends and talking to people that we know, so they start posting on Reddit, people who have high karma, on comments, on questions, and making sure that that's something that keeps on working and keeps on being done a lot more. Looking into organic references from people as well and into what that happens. Other things we've done a lot lately is like YouTuber influencers, because if there's no browser, I will still watch videos and entertain myself. So thinking about YouTubers or TikTok or Instagram Reels, like how do you show up on those? How do people pay attention and see you? Because those will still exist even if the browser doesn't exist. And I'm thinking about how people are using these new platforms, and then how these new platforms basically read and understand things. Two more examples on ChatGPT. For example, we're returning a website that's for ChatGPT, like Markdown style, with more links, more information. That is a specific website that is not what the human sees, but rather a Markdown version specifically done for LLMs. So they better understand my site and how it connects to each other and how to think about things. And one experiment, for example, we've done is in a lot of blog posts, we've added, like before you used to have these buttons on share on Twitter, share on Facebook, share on blah. We've changed them to like summarize me and let me ask questions on ChatGPT. Because by doing that, because ChatGPT now has memory, it will remember that I sent 2 or 3 links from this product, which means that eventually when I ask new questions, because I have this summarize me something there and it will be on the memory, it will remember and use me more for new queries and new things that the user is asking. So thinking about how these LLMs interact, how they have memory, how they have their context, is the main thing that I think marketers need to think so much more about now.
Yeah, it's increasingly becoming the number one distribution channel. I think it's going to continue taking over the mind share of everybody. Every time I read an article or every time, I guess video's a little bit different, but even then, with all of the AI video that's being produced, I really do think about, is this a dying medium the same way that, folks used to, less and less folks started reading books over time. I feel like we're unfortunately starting to see that with written content. It actually reminds me, so, optimizing for LLMs now reminds me, and this is maybe me dating myself, but reminds me of the early days of SEO where we used to keyword stuff and, on a white page have 100 links that are white so
Yes.
nobody could see them at the bottom of the page. And, people are doing the same thing with, oh, okay, Reddit is starting to be, cited a lot from these sources. Well, let me go and spam Reddit and let me go buy aged accounts and let me do all of these little tricks. And it's funny, I love Reddit just as a consumer. I learn so much from it and I browse all the information on there. But it's really funny to actually start noticing patterns where I know this was created for LLMs. Like I read something and to, the untrained eye, it might seem like utility content, but for me, I'm like, this person is keyword stuffing on Reddit. It's crazy. And so
Exactly.
how do you think that affects, first of all, the longevity of some of these strategies and maybe what the evolution of the future of LLM optimization looks like once we, have unfortunately run through these tricks or the LLMs get a little bit smarter at detecting, this type of behavior?
I think I agree 100% with what you said. And I think, first of all, we should do the tricks now because they work. I agree that they will stop working eventually, but while they work, there's not so many of us that are using them. So let's actually use them because it will help us. On the long run, I think I think in the future we'll see ways to verify if something was written by AI or if something was done by a human. And I think LLMs will prioritize human written content or human done video content for real opinions on how to pick things and how to do things. So that's, I think, number one, where working with influencers, I actually think will matter because influencers will help you convince other folks. And then those other folks eventually will start sharing. That's thing one. Thing two, I think virality becomes so much more important. So I think starting to think into how can I add virality into my product? How can I make sure, how can I give rewards to people who share it? How can I make the experience of the product better if other people use it? But virality will be another thing where it's recommendations from other people that are similar to you, that are human, that you know them, will matter a lot more as well. And finding ways for people to write about you, to talk about you, some organic, some also paid, will matter. Similar to what happens, to be honest, now with SEO as well. But I do think the game will change a lot. Main thing, like videos, we might see more videos with AI, but I think we'll see these done by human or something like that, which people will care about in the future. And I think because of that, TikTok will still matter, YouTube Shorts will still matter, Instagram Reels will still matter. It's like, I personally hate them, but most of the people don't. And I think it's something we should think about as marketers.
Absolutely. And you said something really interesting that I do think about a lot. I remember 5 years ago, one of the things that was always kind of the foundational layer of everything that I do was it has to be formatted perfectly. It has to have perfect grammar, perfect spelling. If I was creating a video, the lighting needed to be perfect. I couldn't stutter, I couldn't make any mistakes. And it's so funny that these days I'm also seeing this trend that like a lot of the stuff that I type on the internet, I type in all lowercase. I don't even capitalize the first letter. A lot of the, video takes that I have where I stutter or maybe I mispronounce a word, actually intentionally leave that in there because I do think we're starting to see a world in which AI produced content or AI produced video is getting so good that the only way to really tell that it's human made or AI made is through the imperfections. So I think we're kind of starting to swing into the pendulum is swinging into this world where it's like, well, why don't we embrace the imperfections? Why don't we embrace the things that make us quintessentially human and then have that be sort of the watermark on the content to help these LLMs distinguish whether it's AI produced or human produced?
The problem with that is that you can also fake it. Like every outbound email that I've sent lately, I put typos on purpose. Every time I use whisper flow to dictate what I write on my emails and WhatsApp, I put everything has to be lowercase. And that's my mandate when I write with it. So I think the problem with some of these things is that they are still so easy to hack that people might think something is human when it's not. So I actually think we will need real verifiable things. Like I can imagine a future where I go to Twitter and to tweet my tweet that I wrote as a human, I need to do Face ID or put my Touch ID to show that it was actually me doing it or doing something that is not hackable. And I think we'll see more of those in the very near future.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see there are some startups out there that are focusing on this like human verification layer, which I definitely think is going to be something that's going to be required for us to even be able to distinguish what's real, what's not real. It's going to, things are going to be pretty crazy in the future. But I think also to your point of it's hackable, I don't know if you've seen the videos of the phone farms and stuff where they set
Yes.
up hundreds, if not thousands of devices, and they're even using rubber fingers to scroll through them. And it's crazy to think about, for every verification measure, there's always going to be somebody to game it. And I do think it's this very interesting game of cat and mouse. And I actually really don't know where it's going to end up.
I agree. But I think that's true for encryption, where people start to break encryption and there's a new one. And that's the game. It's always been in humanity. And I think it will continue. But I think we'll try to find more and more ways, at least, to find original content. And to be honest, like I trust picking things, I trust more what companies that I work with or friends recommend me more than any websites typically I can find. Because I know, like as you said, the trained eye knows when something is paid, when something is sponsored, when something is not real, but most people don't know.
Absolutely. And that's actually a really interesting point. We spoke about a lot of direct response optimizations and distribution tactics. But something that you said really resonated with me, which is that you trust the recommendations of your friends. And to me, at least, those are actually aspects of what a brand is, right? So you have a product and you have, distribution channels and you have distribution tactics. But now we're really starting to see a brand start, becoming a pretty important mode. And I know that you yourself, you're so direct response focused. And I think brand 10 years ago, you would have heard brand, you would have went, get out of here with that. I don't want to hear any of that. But do you think brand is now starting to become increasingly more important and something that people should focus on in addition to hardcore distribution?
I think brand and taste are probably the two most important things to focus on right now, mostly because two things. First, as you said, I'm an engineer. So when I started doing growth, first of all, there wasn't as much growth. So the only thing to me was like, okay, let's use the scientific method on KPIs to improve them. And I didn't do anything on branding because there was no way to easily measure what was going on. How can I measure a billboard? How can I measure the story that I'm saying? Like impossible. But lately, I think more and more brand is impossible to measure, but it's what grabs most people attentions. People care about real stories because they feel empathy for them. People care about new things that are novelty that nobody else is doing. People care about a unique point of view. People care about rage rates, which could also be like part of your branding as well. And I think starting to focus more on what's your story, how do you tell it, what's unique and different about you makes a big difference. And I'll give you an example of this. One of the companies that I work with is called Clerk. Clerk does authentication for developers, similar to what Auth0 used to do. And they focus mostly on tactics, like they do YouTuber influencers, they do geo, like we've been doing a lot of the things that we mentioned in this podcast, but they actually have a unique view of the world that they do not talk about as much. And I think they should talk more about it. Most of the startups eventually start doing enterprise sales. They start doing some outbound, like getting a sales team, etc. The CEO of Clerk doesn't want to do it. So they are entirely product-led growth. They do not want to do enterprise sales. And their take is that to triple revenue, which is the objective for this year, they will add more product and get people to buy those new products and start to focus on startups first versus doing enterprise sales. They don't talk about it. They should, because it's unique. People will care. Like, we do not want to do enterprise sales. Even if we make more revenue, we don't care. It's not part of the DNA of the CEO and the company, and they prefer to die rather than to do that. And talk about why you do that, why it's so core to your belief, how you're thinking about creating new products. And talking about that, like, basically explains the reality of the culture of the product, the reality of how they think about the world. And they are so unique and creative in that sense that I think if they shared more about it, people would care, people would share. And even if it's not exactly about the product, people will be like, oh, these guys are really different. Let's see what they are doing different and why they are doing it. And it's going to be impossible to measure if it works or if it doesn't. But I think they should spend so much more time sharing that story. And I see more and more companies having this role like head of storytelling or storyteller or something like that basically focuses on how to share the story. What used to be the comms team that used to do like PR with Wall Street Journal and New York Times and stuff like that is dead. And now it's all about, how do I share my story on podcasts? How do I share my story on Twitter? How do I share my story on LinkedIn? How do I share my story on YouTube? And how do I do this new media to talk more about my brand and my story? And I think it's something that every company should think a lot more about as well.
Absolutely agreed. And it's so fitting that Clerk works with you as well, because you've previously advocated for the death of the SDR, right? It's not a requirement to have a sales team. It is not a requirement to put humans in those seats. And I think this now, combined with the reality of, AI outbound potentially, maybe that function is actually starting to become obsolete. But it's really interesting going out into the market with something like that. I mean, that's a pretty big bet, right? That's a pretty contrarian take. And it could potentially work and get a ton of people aligned and say, folks like you would say, yes, 100% agreed. I love this. And then, could also potentially create some enemies and could backfire. But I do agree that taking those big swings, like we talked about earlier, that's what makes people stand out. And, worst case scenario, if it is a failure, then you actually get to learn something.
Exactly. And that's okay, because if they see that this thing doesn't work, they will try other products. Or maybe they do go into enterprise sale. Like, I don't know what will happen in the future, but at least they have this strong conviction that they have to share with the world, because when it's so unique and strong, people will listen.
And so, speaking of big bets, I have a pretty interesting question. I would love to ask you about your favorite failure, right? You've taken a lot of bets in your career, and I'm sure, some of them have succeeded, a lot of them failed, and that's our growth methodology. We always have to experiment, we have to learn. What has been or have been some of your favorite failures that have led you to some of your best learnings?
I have two or three, I think. One, I think we already talked about it, which is, I think one of my biggest failures was that I never did anything on branding early on, because I was too scared to focus on that, because there was no KPI. And if there's no KPI, how can I know if it works? And I was never a marketer because I was an engineer. So I was scared of becoming a marketer. I was scared of doing something that is impossible to measure. I just scared to try something. Now, I always, like, history is written by winners. So now that I did well, I'm like, okay, now I can try branding because I have more faith in myself, maybe. But I think that's for sure learning number one. Learning number two was one thing that happened at Auth0's, which is, in the beginning, we focused a lot on signups and activated signups and people try the platform. Eventually, we thought that if we focus more on talk to sales, we call them form sales, like talk to sales, we would get more people to buy us. And for some time, that was true because immediately for the year that we started to do that, we grew revenue a lot more rapidly. But then, because we stopped focusing as much on getting people to sign up and to have a good experience on the product, the next year it was so much harder to actually get more revenue because we didn't think about how a lot of the people who were clicking on talk to sales were actually people that had tried the product before. And if we had less people trying the product before, we had less people clicking on the talk to sales. So we sort of forgot of the real product-led growth users. And it was so hard to go back. Like we had to literally switch what half of the marketing team was doing to get signups back on track and activated signups. So another learning was how important the PLG side is, and that you never lose an eye of that when you start focusing more on talk to sales or revenue or enterprise sales or stuff like that. And third learning was I spent once 300K in ads to bring a lot more signups. We had so much more signups, but then none of them activated, meaning none of them, like they just signed up, but they never got to the wow moment. They never experienced the product, which meant that we didn't care back then if people converted to revenue or not, because we thought like, look, if they have a good experience and they get to the wow moment, eventually they buy us. They doesn't have to be now, but they didn't even get to that. So then learning there was the main KPI for ads at least should be activated signups, because it's early enough that we get some signal. It's not like revenue that takes longer, but it's later enough where we know they did something and it wasn't just a sign up. I think those were the three biggest failures.
I mean, some super powerful lessons. And I love that, obviously, they were mistakes, and obviously there were issues that I'm sure at the time felt pretty soul crushing. But ultimately down the line, it's funny because it sounds like some of those learnings that you had are so deeply foundational to your philosophies today. And I feel like that maybe might not have been the case unless you experienced those failures.
100%.
I have a kind of a curveball question, but if you can get one message in front of every single founder in the entire world, what would that one message be?
I think the message would be it's more important to be creative and to try your shots than to fail. My first marketing job was at Auth0, and I had a lot of crazy ideas, but other people on the team, on other places or peers were like, no, those things will not work. Like no company does that. And when I was at Auth0, I would say I tried one in every three that I followed, which I had a bit more confidence in. And typically, not all, of course, but typically those worked. So I regret not trying the other two, where maybe I came without experience, but with a new look of the world. And those creative things would work out to do something different or unique instead of doing the same as the rest. Now I try all of the shots that I have. And I think that would be the main thing I would think about. It's like, give it a try. Like if it fails and you learn something about it, it's okay. Like it's not an error. Like you learned and you iterate. But I think it's like, try your shots, try to be creative, and don't be scared if something is not what everybody else is doing.
I love that. That is such a strong message. And I genuinely do hope that everybody listens to that, then rewinds that, and then listens to that again, and then thinks about that before they go to sleep and when they wake up, because it's so true. You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, and you never know if something is going to work until you give it at least somewhat of a try. And that's what we're all about. That's what growth is all about. It's about experimentation and learning and incorporating those learnings into the roadmap.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, Gonto, this was honestly one of my favorite conversations that I've ever had on this show. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on, share your wisdom, tell some of your war stories, and I think inspire a lot of folks to really start thinking about how they're going to future-proof their businesses in this new AI, era. If people want to follow more of your content or, see more of what you're doing, where should they look?
They should go to Twitter. I'm addicted to Twitter, sadly. So they should follow me. It's Gonto. So MGONTO. I tweet there all of the stuff that I write in the blog at Hypergrowth, or even some random thoughts. So please follow me there to increase my ego.
Absolutely. And I'll definitely link that in the show notes. And no TikTok or or Instagram people should follow.
No.
I love it. Well, thank you so much again, man. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to get this live into the world.
Thank you for inviting, and hopefully useful for your listeners. Thank you again for inviting.